Dear friends, what you are witnessing right now is not a legal battle. It is not a serious dispute over facts. It is certainly not some organic groundswell of outrage. It is a coordinated flailing, a last gasp from a structure that has lost its center of gravity. And that gravity was always influence and authenticity and the ability to command attention without begging for it. And that is precisely why Candace Owens stands where she does today, where she is today, unshaken, unflappable, unapologetic, and unmistakably dominant in a media landscape that rewards and always has rewarded clarity and punishes confusion and mendacity and lying. Because make no mistake, my friends, confusion is exactly what the opposition is selling you. They want you so disoriented. They want you to feel like everything is under attack by all of these lawsuits and all of these little internecine battles between this guy and that guy who amount to a hill of nothing. They want you second guessing. They want you to believe that somehow a handful of lawsuits filed by peripheral figures with no independent credibility, no measurable reach, and no meaningful platform, that they represent some kind of momentum. When in reality, it represents desperation, pathetic desperation. Because when argument fails, when persuasion collapses, and when the audience stops listening, what it's left with is lawsuits and hollow threats and noisy masquerading and fists flailing and by God, you, and going on the Charlie Kirk show, which is blasphemy, which is heretical. All of this masquerading as action, and that is exactly where we are right now. A parade of insignificant actors, nullities, insignificant twits, little panjandrums, little nobodies, little parvenus maybe, attempting to elevate themselves by attracting their names, or rather attaching their names, I should say, and attracting your attention to someone whose relevance they could never even achieve or get near. They could never achieve Candace Owens' relevance, her importance on their own, never. And the centerpiece of this spectacle is the illusion that Candace has lost something, that she's lost support or lost influence or lost the room. And yet every metric that matters, every metric that counts, every metric that is monitored and hence is a metric, it tells a different story. It tells a different story regarding audience engagement and viewership and cultural penetration and the ability to set the agenda rather than chase it. These are what we're talking about right now. This is so serious, so absolutely critical. And I want you to understand and to focus on what we're saying right now. Because everything that we've talked about right now, these are not the traits, again, of somebody who's fading or somebody who's collapsing. These are the unmistakable markers, again, of somebody who has outgrown the confines of the very system now attempting to restrain her. And that system embodied here by TPUSA in its orbit of subordinate, insignificant voices, I guess, is reacting exactly the way institutions always react when a figure represents something. When a figure like Candace Owens refuses, remains steadfast, and refuses to be contained. See, they attempt to redefine reality, and they attempt to invert perception, and they attempt to convince you somehow that up is down and that independence is irrelevance, and that here is the problem. Reality does not cooperate with the narrative when the narrative is built on sand, on bullshit. And these lawsuits, these lawsuits, which are not only sometimes laughable, but inconceivable. And you're wondering, and by the way, this goes all the way to Brigitte, all the way down. Let us be very clear. These lawsuits are sand. They are legally hollow, structurally weak, and destined for the same fate that awaits every complaint that cannot meet the most basic threshold of American juridically understood defamation law. Because in this country, we do not punish speech simply because it stings or hurts or is rude or is opprobrious. We do not elevate hurt feelings into actionable harm, and we certainly do not discard the bedrock principle established in New York Times against Sullivan, which requires actual malice. Malice, reckless disregard for the truth. And not only that, half of the stuff that she's been saying is opinion. It's observation. And yeah, you could say observation sometimes, especially when you're a public figure, can make you feel bad. It can hurt your feelings. It can make you feel kind of stupid. That does not a cause of action make. New York Times has held a standard so high, so deliberately protective of free expression, that it exists specifically to prevent exactly this kind of weaponized litigation. So where is the malice? Where is the knowingly uttered false statement? Where is the reckless disregard for the truth that can be proven, articulated, and somehow sustained under scrutiny? It's not there. And it's never been there, and it doesn't exist. And everywhere, everyone involved in filing these claims knows exactly that's it. Why? Because maybe one could figure out that the cost of filing and whatever the litigation cost is, it's a last gasp to maybe perhaps elevate status, recognition, maybe in the real world. Hey, it's worth getting my name out. These names. How many times have you said, "Who are these people? I don't even recognize them. I don't even recognize their names. They're insignificant. They're insignificant little nullities. They're chankings. They're great words. I have things like I think it's chankings. You know when you punch holes in paper, the hole. You know when you spin out pits. It's the remain. They're insignificant. It's the stuff that's left over. And by the way, this is why the legal strategy is not about winning. It's about signaling. It's about creating perhaps headlines. It's about manufacturing the illusion of consequence. But illusion collapses under examination. And what you have to understand, the moment these claims enter a courtroom, the moment that we cross the bar of justice, where, last time I checked, where evidence matters, where standards apply, where rhetoric is stripped away and replaced with proof, they will fail. Not because of bias, not because of politics, but because they lack the fundamental elements required to survive. No identifiable damages, no concrete injury, no causal link between statement and harm, no defamation that meets the constitutional and accepted threshold. And that is why you are seeing a flurry rather than a focus case. Because flurries are designed to overwhelm perception, not to withstand analysis. And by the way, while the spectacle unfolds, the broader narrative continues. And that narrative continues to unravel. Because the White House Correspondents Dinner, that moment, that was supposed to reinforce the hierarchy. Instead, it exposed it. And this, if ever there was the crushing blow, the denouement, the finale, the sayonara, if ever that was it, the valedictory for Erika, that was it. It showed a disconnect between those who believe they still control the conversation and the discussion and those who actually do. It highlighted the gap between manufactured relevance and earned influence. And once that gap is visible, it cannot be unseen. And that is why the reaction has been so frantic, because the mask slipped and you're seeing the curtain. Oz, you know the analogy. You know what's behind the curtain. And when the mask slips and the scramble begins and the attempt to reassert control, all of it is concatenated. The reframing of the story, the attempt to convince the audience that what they just witnessed was not what it appeared to be, all of that fails. Because reality is stubborn. And audiences are not as easily manipulated as some would hope, especially not in an era where information flows freely and gatekeepers no longer have a monopoly on interpretation. And this is where Candace Owens thrives. In that environment of direct connection, unfiltered communication, and unapologetic perspectives, because whether you agree with her or not, it doesn't really matter. She speaks with clarity, a limpidity, a pellucidity, with a transparency. She speaks with conviction, and she does not hide behind committees and organizations and carefully curated and orchestrated talking points. And that authenticity is precisely what cannot be replicated by those now attempting to diminish her. Why? Because authenticity cannot be reverse engineered through litigation. It can't be manufactured through press releases. And it certainly cannot be imposed through legal intimidation, because you can't intimidate her. And so what you are seeing is not a collapse of Candace Owens by any stretch of the imagination. It is the exposure of a system that depended on control and is now confronting a figure whose image is one who refuses to be controlled. And that is unsettling to those who built their influence on alignment rather than independence. Because once independence becomes, this is important, once it becomes standard, alignment loses its value. And that's the existential threat here. Not a tweet, not a statement, not a disagreement, but the emergence of a voice that does not require institutional validation to be heard. And so the lawsuits will come, and they'll pile on, and the headlines will follow, and the talking points will be repeated. But none of that changes the underlying reality, which is this, that these claims lack substance, they lack facts, they lack any kind of juridical heft, and they lack durability, and they lack the legal foundation required to succeed. And as they move through the system, they will be tested and prodded and pressure tested, if you will, put through circuit breakers. And when they are tested and when they are reviewed, they will fail. And when they fail, the narrative built around them will fail as well, because it is built on the same shaky premise that reputation can be affected by repetition, and that repetition can substitute for truth, that volume can substitute for evidence, and that perception can somehow substitute for reality. But in the end, my friend, and you know this, reality always wins. Truth always wins. And in this case, reality is simple. Candace Owens remains a powerful, the most powerful, influential voice with a direct connection to her audience. And the efforts to undermine her through litigation and coordinated messaging are not signs of strength or power. They are signs of weakness. They are the predictable response of those who have lost the argument and all vestiges of reality, and are now attempting to win the optics, the game. But optics fade, they drift away, and headlines change, and what remains is substance. And on that battlefield, the side relying on lawsuits without merit, claims without proof, and moreover, narratives without foundation is not the side that prevails. They will lose. It is the side that eventually disappears, leaving behind a record of noise that cannot withstand the weight of scrutiny. You know what we're doing. And by the way, the laughing. Listen to Candace speaks about this. The derision, the comedic derision, the laughing. You see, while the voice they attempt to silence continues, undeterred, unfiltered, and very much heard, the problem people have to understand is simply this: nobody's buying this. This is warfare. This is warfare. This is not just something that people think about, oh, this is whatever. No, this is warfare. They keep pushing this, and they don't seem to understand it. They don't seem to understand or to grasp this. They don't know how this is working. They think somehow, I guess they think that's all they have. They have nothing. They have this thing called TPUSA, which was Charlie Kirk. It's not there anymore because there's no Charlie. No Charlie, no TPUSA. No Tiki, no Washi. No yin, no yang. It's over with. And they're doing everything. This is $1 billion industry. And they are freaking out. And instead of trying to perhaps maybe create the illusion that maybe they're doing something philanthropic and good, maybe instead of doing that, what they're doing is they're persisting with this nonsense, this crazy idea that somehow Candace is evil, and they're doing everything in their power to throw people at her, and we don't care. We don't care. Remember, if anybody ever asks you, what's this all about? Why are they being so mean to Erika Kirk? Just tell them, do me a favor. Look at anything she's ever said, any moment, any clip, any contribution on her part, any speech, any delivery. Watch her. Watch her for 10 seconds, and you'll see what this is all about.